The spring sun beat down mercilessly on the town of Copper Creek, Arizona Territory, as Zara Mitchell stood trembling before her father. And the man she was supposed to marry, a man whose cruel eyes and whiskey breath made her skin crawl. It was 1878, and at 20 years old, Zara had just committed the unforgivable sin of refusing Vernon Holloway's proposal, a decision that had earned her father's immediate and violent wrath. "You ungrateful little fool." Samuel Mitchell's voice boomed across their modest homestead as his open palm connected with his daughter's cheek, sending her stumbling backward against the porch railing. "Holloway is offering good money and protection, which is more than you deserve." Zara's eyes welled with tears as she steadied herself, one hand pressed against her stinging face. "I won't marry him, father, I cannot." Vernon Holloway, a cattle baron's son with a reputation for cruelty that extended well beyond Copper Creek's borders, stepped forward, his lips twisted in a sneer. "Your pa made promises, girl, and I aim to collect what's mine." "I am not property to be collected." Zara's voice trembled but held firm, her amber eyes flashing with defiance despite the fear coursing through her veins. Her father's face contorted with rage as he raised his hand again, this time balled into a fist. "You'll do as you're told, or so help me," the blow never landed. A strong hand caught Samuel Mitchell's wrist mid-swing, stopping it with such force that the older man winced in pain. "That's no way to treat a lady," came a deep, steady voice. Zara looked up through her tears to see a tall stranger holding her father's arm. He wore dusty riding clothes, a weathered Stetson pushed back on his head, revealing dark hair and eyes that seemed to burn with quiet intensity. His jaw was set firm beneath several days' growth of beard, and though he wasn't brandishing a weapon, there was something in his stance that suggested he didn't need one to be dangerous. "This ain't your business, cowboy," Vernon spat, his hand moving toward the pistol on his hip. The stranger slowly released Samuel's arm and turned fully toward Vernon, something in his gaze making the other man hesitate. "When a man strikes a woman in my presence, I make it my business." "Do you know who I am?" Vernon demanded, puffing out his chest. "Don't much care," the stranger replied evenly. "I know what you are, though. A man who'd stand by while a woman gets beaten isn't much of a man at all." Samuel Mitchell found his voice again. "This is my daughter, and she'll do as she's told. Vernon Holloway is the best match she'll ever get." "Seems the lady disagrees," the stranger said, then glanced at Zara with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with his hard stance. "Miss, are you all right?" Before Zara could respond, Vernon lunged forward, swinging a clumsy punch at the stranger. With almost casual ease, the cowboy sidestepped, caught Vernon by the shirt collar, and sent him sprawling into the dirt. Samuel Mitchell moved to strike his daughter again in his rage, but the stranger was faster. He placed himself between Zara and her father, blocking the blow with his forearm. In one fluid motion, he swept Zara into his arms, her slight frame weightless against his chest. "Put her down," Samuel roared. "That's my daughter." "And you've lost the right to call yourself her father," the stranger said, his voice dangerously quiet. Vernon was struggling to his feet, drawing his pistol. "You're dead, mister." The stranger shifted Zara in his arms to free his right hand, which moved with lightning speed to his holster. His Colt was leveled at Vernon before the man could properly aim. "I wouldn't." Vernon froze, his eyes widening as he recognized the look of a man who wouldn't hesitate to pull the trigger. "Miss," the stranger said without taking his eyes off Vernon, "is there somewhere safe I can take you?" Zara's mind raced. She had no close friends in town, no relatives nearby. Her mother had died 3 years earlier, and since then, her father had become increasingly bitter and controlling. I don't know," she admitted, hating the vulnerability in her voice. The stranger nodded slightly, as if coming to a decision. "Then you're coming with me." "Just until we can sort this out." Vernon sputtered. "You can't just take her, that's kidnapping." "Is it kidnapping to save someone from a beating?" the stranger asked, his gun unwavering. "Back away, both of you." "The lady's coming with me, and we'll settle this proper like when tempers have cooled." "Who the hell are you?" Samuel demanded, the stranger's mouth curved into a slight, grim smile. "Name's Isaac Westbrook." "Remember it, because if you come after this lady with anything but an apology, you'll be seeing me again." With that, Isaac backed toward his horse, a magnificent chestnut gelding waiting patiently at the hitching post. Somehow, he managed to mount without ever fully letting go of Zara, settling her in front of him in the saddle. "This isn't over," Vernon shouted as Isaac turned the horse away. "For your sake, it had better be," Isaac called back, spurring the horse into a canter down the dusty road that led out of town. Zara clung to the saddle horn, her mind spinning with the sudden turn of events. She had just been carried off by a complete stranger, yet somehow, pressed against his solid chest as they rode away from the only home she'd ever known, she felt safer than she had in years. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice nearly lost in the wind. Isaac's arm tightened slightly around her waist. "No need for thanks, Miss Mitchell. No decent man could have stood by and watched that." "How do you know my name, small town?" he replied simply. "Word gets around." "I arrived a few days ago and heard talk of Mitchell's daughter being promised to Holloway. Didn't expect to witness what I did, though." Zara fell silent, watching the familiar landscape of Copper Creek fall away behind them. She should be terrified riding off with a man she'd just met, leaving behind everything she knew. But the alternative had been Vernon Holloway's cruel hands and her father's unyielding control. Whatever lay ahead with this stranger named Isaac Westbrook, it couldn't be worse than what she was leaving behind. They rode for nearly an hour, following a winding trail that led up into the foothills above the town. The spring wildflowers painted patches of purple and yellow across the landscape, and the scent of sage filled the air with each passing breeze. Finally, Isaac guided the horse toward a small cabin nestled against a stand of pine trees. "My place," he explained as they approached. "It's not much, but it's private. No one will think to look for you here right away." The cabin was indeed modest, a single room with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed pushed against one wall, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and a small cooking area. It was sparse but clean, with none of the empty whiskey bottles or general disarray that characterized her father's house in recent years. Isaac helped her down from the horse, his hands strong but gentle at her waist. He cleared his throat awkwardly once she was standing on her own. "I'll sleep outside tonight. You can have the cabin." Zara looked up at him, really seeing him now that the immediate danger had passed. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps late 20s, with features that might have been considered handsome if not for the scar that ran along his jawline and the weathered quality of his skin that spoke of years under the harsh western sun. "Why did you help me, Mr. Westbrook?" she asked quietly. Isaac removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. "Isaac, please, and I told you no decent man could have." "Yes, you said that," Zara interrupted gently. "But there were plenty of decent men in town who have watched my father's temper for years and done nothing." "What made you different?" A shadow crossed his face. "Let's just say I've seen what happens when good people stand by and do nothing." He replaced his hat and gestured toward the cabin door. "You should rest. I'll take care of the horse and bring in some water for you." Zara wanted to press further, but something in his expression told her the subject was closed for now. She nodded and stepped into the cabin, her mind still reeling from the day's events. The interior was cool and dim after the bright sunlight outside. A small window let in enough light for her to see a shelf with a few books, a trunk at the foot of the bed, and a rifle mounted on pegs above the door. It was a man's space, functional rather than comfortable, but it felt infinitely safer than her father's house had in years. Zara sank onto the edge of the bed, her legs suddenly unable to support her as the reality of her situation hit her full force. She had no belongings save the clothes on her back, no money, and no plan. She was entirely dependent on the kindness of a man. She'd just met a man who, for all his gallantry, was still a stranger. Outside, she could hear Isaac moving around, the soft nickering of his horse, the creak of a pump handle as he drew water. Ordinary sounds that somehow grounded her, pulling her back from the edge of panic. When he returned, he carried a bucket of water and a bundle under his arm. He set the water near the small washstand and placed the bundle on the table. "Brought you a shirt to sleep in," he explained, not quite meeting her eyes. And there's soap by the basin. I'll bring in some food shortly, but I'll knock first. Thank you, Zara said, touched by his consideration. But I can't stay here indefinitely. I need to figure out what to do next. Isaac nodded, his expression serious. We'll work on that tomorrow. For now, just rest. You're safe here. With that, he stepped back outside, closing the door firmly behind him. Zara moved to the basin and looked at her reflection in the small mirror hanging above it. A bruise was already forming on her cheekbone where her father had struck her. She touched it gently, wincing at the tenderness. As she washed the dust of the road from her face and hands, she thought about Isaac Westbrook. There was something in his manner, a controlled intensity, a watchfulness that suggested he was a man with his own troubled past. Yet he had intervened without hesitation when he saw her in danger, risking himself for a woman he didn't know. She changed into the shirt he'd left her, the soft cotton falling nearly to her knees. It smelled of soap and sunshine, as if it had been dried on a line outdoors. She sat on the edge of the bed again, listening to the sounds of Isaac moving around outside, preparing what she assumed would be their dinner. A knock came at the door a short while later. "Miss Mitchell, I've got some food if you're hungry." "Yes, please come in," she called, suddenly aware of how hungry she actually was. She hadn't eaten since early morning, before her father had summoned her to meet with Vernon Holloway. Isaac entered carrying a tray with 2 plates of beans, bacon, and corn bread. He set it on the table and gestured for her to join him. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the simple food tasting better than anything Zara could remember. "Tomorrow," Isaac said finally, breaking the silence, "we should talk about your options." "You can't go back to your father, not after today," Zara nodded slowly. "I have an aunt in Denver. She wrote to me after my mother died, offering a place to stay, but my father wouldn't allow it." "Denver's a long way," Isaac observed, "but it might be your best choice. I could escort you part of the way, make sure you get there safely." "Why would you do that?" Zara asked, studying his face in the fading light. "You've already done more than most would." Isaac was quiet for a moment, his eyes focused on something distant. "Let's just say I've been where you are, caught in a situation with no good choices. Someone helped me once. I'm just passing it along." There was more to his story, Zara was certain, but she didn't press. Instead, she said simply, "Thank you, Isaac. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along when you did." His eyes met hers, dark and serious. "I do, and that's why I couldn't ride away." Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding, a connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. Zara felt her heart quicken, and she looked away first, suddenly conscious of being alone in a cabin with a man she barely knew, wearing nothing but his shirt. Isaac seemed to sense her discomfort. He stood abruptly, gathering the empty plates. "I'll leave you to rest. Got a bedroll outside that'll do me fine. If you need anything, just call out." "Good night, Isaac," Zara said softly. He paused at the door, his silhouette outlined against the twilight sky. "Good night, Miss Mitchell." "Zara," she corrected. "Please call me Zara." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Good night, Zara." Then he was gone, closing the door behind him, leaving Zara alone with her thoughts and the lingering warmth of his presence. Morning came with the chirping of birds and the soft golden light of dawn filtering through the cabin's small window. Zara awoke feeling more rested than she had in months, despite the unfamiliar bed and the uncertainty of her situation. For a moment, she simply lay still, listening to the quiet sounds of the wilderness around her. The events of the previous day came rushing back: her father's rage, Vernon's cruel smile, and the stranger who had swept her away from danger. Not such a stranger now, perhaps. Isaac Westbrook. Even his name felt like a shield against the chaos she'd left behind. A soft knock at the door brought her fully awake. "Zara, there's coffee ready when you are." "Thank you," she called back. "I'll be out shortly." She rose and dressed quickly, smoothing her rumpled dress as best she could and using a bit of water from the basin to wash her face and tidy her hair. There was little she could do about the bruise on her cheekbone, which had darkened overnight to a vivid purple. Outside, she found Isaac tending a small fire, a pot of coffee balanced on the rocks surrounding it. He looked up as she approached, his expression immediately darkening as he noticed her bruise. "That looks painful," he said quietly. Zara touched her cheek self-consciously. It's not so bad. He didn't contradict her, but his jaw tightened visibly. He poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed one to her. Sit, he offered, gesturing to a fallen log he'd positioned near the fire. I've been thinking about your situation. Zara accepted the coffee gratefully and settled onto the log. The morning air was cool and the hot drink warmed her hands pleasantly. As have I, she admitted. My aunt's offer was made 3 years ago. I'm not certain it still stands. Isaac nodded thoughtfully. Still worth trying. Denver would be far enough from your father's reach. He hesitated, then added, There's another option, though. I've been hired to drive a small herd to a ranch near Santa Fe. It's honest work for a fair man. The trail there would be safer than heading to Denver alone, and once there, you might find employment or passage on to wherever you decide. Zara considered his words. Santa Fe wasn't as far as Denver, but it was still a considerable distance from Copper Creek and from her father and Vernon Holloway. When do you leave? Day after tomorrow, Isaac replied. It's not an easy journey for a woman alone, but I'd see to your safety. I'm not afraid of hard work or rough conditions, Mr. Westbrook, Zara said with a hint of pride. I've been keeping my father's house since I was 14. A small smile touched Isaac's lips. I don't doubt your capability, Miss Mitchell. I'm merely pointing out that trail life isn't gentle. Neither is life with my father, she countered, then softened her tone. I appreciate the offer, truly. Let me consider it. They were interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Isaac was on his feet instantly, his hand moving to the pistol at his hip as he stepped protectively in front of Zara. A moment later, a rider appeared on the trail leading to the cabin. A woman, to Zara's surprise, dressed in men's clothing with her dark hair braided and tucked under a wide-brimmed hat. She reined in her spotted mare and regarded them with curious eyes. Morning, Isaac, she called. Got company, I see. Isaac relaxed slightly, though his posture remained alert. Morning, Ruth. This is Miss Zara Mitchell. Zara, this is Ruth Bailey. She owns the next property over. Ruth Bailey looked to be in her early 40s, with laugh lines around her eyes and a no-nonsense set to her mouth. Her gaze took in Zara's appearance, lingering briefly on the bruise, before returning to Isaac with a raised eyebrow. Mitchell's daughter, she asked, her voice neutral. Isaac nodded once, his expression guarded. There was trouble in town yesterday. Miss Mitchell needed assistance. Understanding dawned in Ruth's eyes. I see. She dismounted smoothly and approached Zara with an outstretched hand. Pleased to meet you, Miss Mitchell, though I'm sorry for the circumstances. Zara shook the offered hand, surprised by the woman's firm grip and direct manner. Likewise, Mrs. Bailey. Miss Bailey, the woman corrected with a small smile, never found a man worth the trouble of marriage. Her eyes flicked to Isaac briefly, then back to Zara. I came to remind this one about our agreement for today, but I see he's occupied. Isaac ran a hand through his hair, looking momentarily chagrined. The fence line, I'd forgotten. Clearly, Ruth said dryly. She studied Zara again, then made a decision. Miss Mitchell, I don't mean to pry, but if you're in need of lodging more appropriate than a bachelor's cabin, I've room at my place. Zara glanced at Isaac, uncertain. His expression was unreadable, but he nodded slightly. Ruth's place would be more comfortable than mine, he acknowledged, and safer should anyone come looking. The offer was tempting. While Zara felt strangely secure in Isaac's presence, she was acutely aware of the impropriety of her current situation. Staying with another woman would be far more acceptable and might give her time to think clearly about her next steps. That's very kind of you, Miss Bailey, Zara said. If you're certain it's no imposition, wouldn't offer if it was, Ruth replied matter-of-factly. Besides, Isaac owes me a day's work on my south fence line, and this way he can fulfill his obligation without worrying about leaving you alone. And so it was decided. Zara gathered her few belongings, essentially just the clothes she had arrived in, and rode double with Ruth back to her homestead. A tidy collection of buildings nestled in a small valley about a mile from Isaac's cabin. Isaac promised to join them by midday to begin work on the fence. Ruth's home was modest but comfortable, with feminine touches that Zara had sorely missed since her mother's death curtains at the windows. a colorful quilt on the spare bed, and the scent of dried herbs hanging from the kitchen rafters. "Been on my own for 15 years, Ruth explained as she showed Zara to the small bedroom that would be hers. "Came out here with my brother after the war. He passed on from consumption 5 years back, left me the place. Most folks thought I'd sell up and move back east, but I'd rather face cougars than city gossips any day." "It's lovely," Zara said sincerely, taking in the simple, clean room. "Thank you for opening your home to me." Ruth waved away her thanks. "Us women have to stick together out here." "Now, why don't you tell me what happened with your father and why you ended up at Isaac Westbrook's cabin?" Over cups of tea at Ruth's kitchen table, Zara related the events of the previous day: her father's insistence that she marry Vernon Holloway, her refusal, the subsequent violence, and Isaac's timely intervention. Ruth listened without interruption, her weathered face growing increasingly grim. "Your father always did have a temper," she said when Zara had finished. "Knew him slightly when your mother was alive. She was a gentle soul, too gentle for him, I always thought." "You knew my mother?" Zara asked, surprised. Ruth nodded. "Not well, mind you, but enough to recognize you've got her eyes and her spirit." She sipped her tea thoughtfully. "As for Isaac stepping in, that doesn't surprise me either. He's a good man, though he carries his own burdens. He mentioned he'd been hired to drive cattle to Santa Fe," Zara said. "He offered to take me along." Ruth's eyebrows rose slightly. "Did he now? That's interesting." "What do you mean?" "Isaac keeps to himself mostly. Been in these parts about 8 months, does odd jobs, helps where needed, but doesn't get involved in folks' personal matters." "Him offering to take you along, that's out of character." Zara felt a flutter of unease. "Do you think I shouldn't trust him?" Ruth's laugh was short but genuine. "Lord, no. If there's one man in the territory you can trust, it's Isaac Westbrook. I meant it as a compliment to you, girl. You must have made quite an impression." Before Zara could respond, they heard the sound of a horse approaching. Ruth rose to look out the window. "Speak of the devil," she murmured, then called, "We're in here, Isaac." He appeared in the doorway moments later, removing his hat as he entered. His eyes immediately sought Zara, as if assuring himself of her well-being before turning to Ruth. "Ready to show me that fence line? Eager to work, are we?" Ruth teased, but she was already reaching for her hat. "Zara, there's stew simmering for lunch. Feel free to rest or explore the property." "We shouldn't be more than a few hours." Left alone in the house, Zara took the opportunity to properly wash and change into a simple dress Ruth had lent her, which fit surprisingly well despite the older woman's more angular frame. The routine tasks of cleaning up and helping herself to the promised stew at midday gave her time to think about her limited options. Her aunt in Denver remained the most logical choice, assuming the woman would still welcome her. But the journey would be dangerous for a woman traveling alone, and Zara had precious little money to fund such a trip. Santa Fe, with Isaac as protection along the way, seemed increasingly practical. And if she were being entirely honest with herself, the prospect of spending more time in Isaac Westbrook's company was not unwelcome. There was something about him that drew her: his quiet strength, his evident integrity, and the hints of a deeper story beneath his reserved exterior. It was nearly sunset when Ruth and Isaac returned, both dusty and tired from their labor. Zara had taken the initiative to prepare dinner using the supplies in Ruth's well-stocked pantry, and the older woman's face registered pleasant surprise at finding the table set and food waiting. "Well, aren't you a blessing?" Ruth said, washing her hands at the basin. "Isaac, this girl can cook too. You might have found yourself a treasure." Isaac looked embarrassed at Ruth's teasing, but his eyes met Zara's with unmistakable appreciation. "Smells wonderful," he said simply. The three of them ate together, the conversation flowing more easily than Zara would have expected. Ruth had a gift for storytelling and regaled them with tales of her early days in the territory, making Zara laugh despite the uncertainty of her situation. As the evening deepened, Ruth excused herself to tend to her chickens before dark, leaving Zara and Isaac alone at the table. A comfortable silence settled between them, broken finally by Isaac. "How are you feeling today, truthfully?" Zara considered the question. "Better than I expected," she admitted, "though I still don't know what I'm going to do." Isaac nodded, his expression thoughtful. The offer to join me on the trail to Santa Fe stands. I'd see you safely there. Why? Zara asked softly. Why would you do that for me? Isaac was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on his hands resting on the table. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, as if the words were being pulled from somewhere deep inside him. 5 years ago, I was married to a woman named Eliza. We had a small ranch in Texas. One day while I was away, 3 men came. They wanted our land, claimed they had some prior right to it. His jaw tightened. Eliza refused them. They beat her badly, left her for dead in our burning house. Zara's hand flew to her mouth. Oh, Isaac, I'm so sorry. I returned to find ashes where my home had been and my wife barely clinging to life. She survived long enough to tell me what happened, to describe the men. His voice had grown flat, emotionless, as if this was the only way he could tell the story. I tracked them for 2 years. Found them one by one. He didn't elaborate on what happened when he found them, but Zara could guess. The controlled power she had sensed in him from their first meeting suddenly made terrible sense. After it was done, I had nothing left. No home, no purpose. I drifted, took work where I could find it. His eyes finally met hers. Yesterday, when I saw that man raise his hand to you, saw the fear in your eyes. It was like seeing Eliza all over again. Only this time I was there, I could stop it. And you did, Zara said gently, reaching across the table to touch his hand. You saved me. Isaac's fingers twitched beneath hers but didn't pull away. Maybe I'm trying to save myself too, he admitted quietly. Find some meaning again. The moment stretched between them, charged with understanding and something more, a recognition of shared pain and resilience. Zara found herself wishing she could erase the shadows from his eyes, bring light back into a life that had known such darkness. The sound of the door opening broke the spell as Ruth returned. If she noticed the lingering tension in the room, she gave no sign of it. Beautiful evening out there, she commented, hanging her shawl on a peg by the door. Though we might get rain tomorrow. Isaac stood, clearing his throat. I should head back, got preparations to make for the cattle drive. He paused, looking at Zara. Will you let me know your decision by tomorrow evening? About Santa Fe, Zara nodded. I will. As Isaac took his leave, Ruth watched him go with a knowing expression. When the door closed behind him, she turned to Zara with raised eyebrows. That man's got it bad already. What do you mean? Zara asked, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. Ruth chuckled. I've known Isaac Westbrook for months, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Like your water in the desert. She began clearing the table, adding casually, so you going to Santa Fe with him? I haven't decided, Zara stammered. Ruth hummed, unconvinced. Well, sleep on it. But if you want my opinion, there are worse fates than traveling with a man like that. She paused, her expression growing serious. Just be careful with him, Zara. He's been broken once already. Don't think he'd survive it again. That night, as Zara lay in the unfamiliar bed in Ruth's spare room, she thought about Isaac's story and the pain he carried. She thought about Santa Fe and the possibilities it might hold. And she thought about the way her heart had quickened when his fingers had remained beneath hers on the table, accepting her touch, perhaps even drawing strength from it. By morning, her decision was made. The next day passed in a flurry of preparations. Ruth, upon hearing Zara's decision to accompany Isaac to Santa Fe, had immediately set about helping her prepare for the journey. From her own modest supplies, the older woman provided Zara with practical clothing, a sturdy pair of boots, and a wide-brimmed hat to protect against the sun. Can't have you riding with the cattle in that pretty dress, Ruth had declared, holding up a pair of men's trousers. Don't look scandalized, girl. On the trail, practicality trumps propriety. Isaac arrived in the late afternoon, leading a second horse, a gentle-looking dun mare. Borrowed her from Johnson at the livery, he explained. She's steady and sure-footed, good for a long journey. His eyes had brightened visibly when Zara told him she'd decided to accompany him to Santa Fe, though he'd maintained his usual reserve. They spent an hour discussing the route, the rigors of the trail, and what she should expect. It won't be easy, he warned. 10 to 12 hours in the saddle most days, dust, heat, maybe storms, and the cattle don't care if you're tired or saddle sore. I understand, Zara assured him. I'm stronger than I look. That evening, Ruth insisted on preparing a special dinner for them, a proper send-off, she called it. Over roast rabbit and vegetables from her garden, Ruth extracted a promise from both of them to stop on their return journey from Santa Fe. "You'll be coming back this way?" Zara asked, surprised. Isaac nodded. "The cattle buyer in Santa Fe has a standing arrangement with the ranch here. I make the drive every few months." The knowledge that Isaac would be returning gave Zara an unexpected sense of relief. It meant her journey to Santa Fe wasn't necessarily a one-way trip, that she would have time to decide what to do next, while knowing she had at least one person she could rely on. As darkness fell, Isaac reluctantly took his leave to make final preparations for their early departure. At the door, he hesitated, then said quietly, "Thank you for trusting me, Zara. I won't let you down." She believed him. Dawn had barely broken when Isaac returned the next morning. Zara was ready, dressed in the practical clothing Ruth had provided, her few belongings packed in a small bundle. Ruth embraced her warmly before she mounted the dun mare. "You take care of each other," the older woman instructed, giving Isaac a meaningful look. "And remember, my door's always open to both of you." They rode away from Ruth's homestead as the first rays of sunlight crested the eastern hills, illuminating the landscape in hues of gold and amber. Ahead of them, two cowboys were already moving a small herd of cattle no more than 50 head toward the trail that would take them south to Santa Fe. "That's Jim and Pete," Isaac explained. "Good men, they'll be riding with us." Zara felt a flutter of nervousness at the prospect of traveling with strangers, but Isaac seemed to sense her concern. They work for Simmons at the Pine Creek Ranch, known them for months. "They'll treat you with respect or answer to me." His protectiveness warmed her, even as she wondered at the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. 4 days ago, she had been resigned to a life under her father's thumb, perhaps eventually forced into marriage with Vernon Holloway. Now she was riding toward an uncertain future with a man who had shared more of himself with her in 2 days than her father had in years. They caught up with the cattle and the other two cowboys, who tipped their hats politely to Zara with minimal curiosity, a fact she found refreshing after years of being the subject of town gossip. Jim was older, perhaps in his 50s, with a weathered face and kind eyes. Pete was younger, closer to Isaac's age, with a ready smile and a respectful manner. The first day on the trail was every bit as challenging as Isaac had warned. The pace was slow but relentless, the sun merciless as it climbed higher in the sky. Dust rose from the hooves of the cattle, coating Zara's skin and clothing, finding its way into her eyes and mouth despite the bandana she wore. By midday, her thighs and back ached from hours in the saddle. By sunset, when they finally made camp near a small creek, every muscle in her body protested. Yet she made no complaint, determined to prove herself capable. Isaac watched her carefully as she dismounted stiffly, clearly fighting the urge to show pain. Without comment, he took care of her horse along with his own, giving her time to stretch her legs. When he returned to where she was attempting to help Jim with the campfire, he handed her a small tin of salve. "For the soreness," he said quietly. "It helps." Dinner was a simple affair of beans, bacon, and coffee, eaten around the campfire as darkness settled over the land. Jim and Pete shared stories of past cattle drives, their easy banter creating a comfortable atmosphere despite the physical discomfort of the day. When it came time to sleep, Isaac discreetly arranged his bedroll near Zara's, but with a respectful distance between them. The gesture wasn't lost on her. He was close enough to provide protection if needed, but far enough to maintain propriety. As she lay looking up at the vast canopy of stars, listening to the occasional lowing of the cattle and the soft breathing of the men, Zara found herself thinking about the strange journey that had brought her here. 4 nights ago, she had gone to sleep in her childhood bed, dreading the morning and her father's continued pressure to marry Vernon. Now she was sleeping under the stars, hundreds of miles from anywhere she'd ever known, in the company of a man who had saved her with no expectation of reward. Despite the physical discomfort, despite the uncertainty of what awaited her in Santa Fe, she felt a curious sense of freedom and possibility that she had never experienced before. The days fell into a rhythm as they moved steadily southward. Wake before dawn, eat a quick breakfast, break camp, and move the cattle until midday. Rest during the hottest hours, then continue until sunset. Make camp, eat, sleep, and begin again. Zara's body gradually adjusted to the demands of the trail. The initial soreness faded, replaced by a new strength and resilience. She learned to read the cattle, to anticipate their movements, to help keep the herd together without being asked. Jim and Pete treated her with increasing respect as they recognized her determination and capability. And Isaac. Isaac was a revelation. On the trail, he was focused and efficient, giving clear directions without being overbearing, earning the respect of the other men through competence rather than intimidation. At the campfire each night, he gradually opened up more, sharing small stories from his childhood in Missouri, his time as a young cowhand in Texas before he met Eliza, his skill with horses. He never again mentioned the tragedy of his wife's death or the vengeance that had followed, but Zara could see how it had shaped him in his watchfulness, in his controlled strength, in the moments when his eyes grew distant with remembered pain. On the fifth night, as they made camp near a small river, a spring storm blew in unexpectedly. Rain poured down in sheets, drenching them all before they could erect proper shelter. The cattle grew restless, requiring all four of them to ride out and calm the herd, returning to camp soaked to the skin and shivering. Isaac immediately set about rebuilding the fire under the meager protection of a canvas tarp. Once the flames were crackling, he insisted Zara take the only relatively dry blanket, wrapping it around her shoulders despite her protests. "You'll catch your death," she argued, trying to share the blanket with him as they huddled near the fire. "Survived worse," he replied with a small smile, but he didn't move away when she shifted closer, their shoulders touching as they sought warmth from the flames. Jim and Pete exchanged knowing glances across the fire but said nothing. Later, when the rain had eased to a gentle patter and the others had drifted to sleep, Isaac and Zara remained by the dying embers, talking softly. "Tell me about your life before," Isaac said. "In Copper Creek, was it always so bad with your father?" Zara stared into the glowing coals. "No. He was different when my mother was alive, stern but fair after she died. It was like something broke inside him. He started drinking, became bitter, blamed me for not being a son who could help with the farm." She sighed. "I think marrying me off to Vernon was his way of being rid of me. Vernon's father offered a good price, and my father saw a chance to solve what he considered his burden." Isaac's jaw tightened. "You were never a burden, you were his daughter." "What about you?" Zara asked, wanting to shift the conversation away from painful memories. "You said you grew up in Missouri, small farm outside of Independence," Isaac confirmed. "Youngest of 4 boys, my father was a blacksmith, taught me the trade, but I always wanted to see more of the world than that little corner of it. So you came west, eventually, after the war." His expression darkened briefly. "Served with the Union, saw things no man should see. When it was over, I couldn't go back to that quiet life, needed space, open country. Do you miss your family?" Isaac was silent for a moment. "Sometimes, my mother most of all. She had a way of seeing right through a person, knowing what they needed before they knew themselves." He glanced at Zara, a half-smile tugging at his lips. "She would have liked you." The simple statement warmed her more than the fire. "I think I would have liked her too." They fell silent, watching the embers slowly fade. Without conscious thought, Zara found her head resting against Isaac's shoulder, her eyes growing heavy with exhaustion. He stiffened momentarily, then relaxed, his arm cautiously moving around her to keep the blanket secure. "Rest," he murmured. "I'll keep watch." She fell asleep there, beside the dying fire, with Isaac's steady presence anchoring her against the uncertainties of the journey ahead. The next morning, if Jim and Pete noticed that Isaac and Zara had slept side by side beneath the shared blanket, they made no comment. The rain had passed, leaving the landscape washed clean, the air fresh with the scent of wet earth and sage. As the days passed and they drew closer to Santa Fe, Zara found herself increasingly conflicted. She was eager to reach their destination, to begin building a new life for herself, yet she was reluctant for the journey to end. On the trail, with Isaac and the others, she had found an unexpected sense of belonging and purpose. And then there was Isaac himself. The connection between them had deepened with each passing day, each shared conversation, each silent moment of understanding. She had come to recognize the subtle shifts in his expression, to understand the meaning behind his brief silences, to anticipate his needs almost as well as he anticipated hers. It was more than gratitude she felt for him now, more than simple friendship. But she had no name for it, or perhaps was afraid to give it one. On the 10th day, as they crested a ridge, Santa Fe appeared in the distance, a sprawl of adobe buildings nestled in the valley below, the mountains rising majestically behind them. They would reach the city by the following afternoon. That night, as they made their final camp, a tension hung in the air that had nothing to do with the cattle or the journey. Jim and Pete sensed it too, excusing themselves earlier than usual after dinner, leaving Isaac and Zara alone by the fire. For a long while neither spoke, the crackling flames filling the silence between them. Finally, Isaac cleared his throat. "Have you decided what you'll do? In Santa Fe?" Zara poked at the fire with a stick, watching the sparks rise toward the star-filled sky. "Not entirely. Find work, I suppose. Save enough to either stay or move on. There's a boarding house for respectable women near the plaza," Isaac said. "Run by a widow named Mrs. Hernandez. She's strict but fair. I could introduce you." "Thank you," Zara said softly. "You've done so much for me already." Isaac shook his head. "It's nothing. It's everything," she corrected, finally looking directly at him. "You saved me, Isaac, not just from my father and Vernon, but from a life without choices." His eyes met hers, dark and serious in the firelight. "You saved yourself, Zara. You refused Vernon despite knowing what it would cost you. That took courage. I just helped you get away." "Either way," she said, "I'll never be able to repay you." "I don't want repayment," Isaac said, his voice rough with emotion. He stopped abruptly, looking away. "What?" Zara pressed gently. "What do you want, Isaac?" He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible over the crackling of the fire. "I want what I have no right to ask for." Zara's heart quickened. "Ask anyway." Isaac turned to her, the firelight casting shadows across his face, highlighting the vulnerability in his eyes. "I've grown, accustomed to your company, the thought of reaching Santa Fe tomorrow and simply leaving you there." He shook his head. "I don't like it." "Then don't," Zara said simply. Isaac's brow furrowed. "What do you mean, don't leave me there?" she clarified, her own courage surprising her. "Or if you must go, come back for me." "Zara," he began, his voice strained, "you don't understand what I'm feeling. It's not proper. You deserve a fresh start, not to be tied to a man with my past." "Shouldn't that be my choice?" Zara asked, moving closer to him. "These past days I've felt more alive, more myself than I ever have, and it's not just the freedom or the journey, it's you, Isaac." His breath caught audibly. "You can't know what you're saying. You've been through a trauma. You're grateful, that's all." "Is that what you think?" Zara challenged, a hint of fire entering her voice. "That I'm some naive girl who can't tell the difference between gratitude and—" She hesitated, then forged ahead. "And deeper feelings." Isaac stood abruptly, pacing away from the fire, his silhouette tense against the night sky. When he turned back to her, his expression was conflicted, desire warring with restraint. "I swore I'd never feel this way again," he admitted. "After Eliza. I closed that part of myself off. It was safer that way." Zara rose to her feet, approaching him slowly as one might a skittish horse. "Safer, perhaps, but lonely too." "Yes," he acknowledged, the single word laden with years of solitary grief. She stopped before him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I'm not asking for promises, Isaac. I'm not even sure what I'm asking for. Just don't pull away, not yet." His hands came up hesitantly to frame her face, his touch infinitely gentle as his thumbs traced the curve of her cheekbones. The bruise her father had left was fading now, a yellowish shadow of what it had been. "Zara," he whispered, her name a prayer on his lips. And then he was kissing her, softly at first, as if afraid she might break or disappear, then with growing urgency as she responded, her arms winding around his neck, drawing him closer. His arms encircled her waist, strong and secure, holding her as if she were precious beyond measure. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I never expected you," he murmured. "Never thought I'd feel this way again." "Nor I," Zara admitted, "though I've had less time to become accustomed to being alone." A small smile touched his lips. "You're remarkably wise for someone so young." "Not so very young," she countered. "And I've learned that life doesn't always grant us the luxury of a slow awakening." Isaac's expression grew serious again. "I don't know what happens next," he confessed. "I've arrangements to return to Copper Creek after delivering the cattle, but the thought of leaving you in Santa Fe—" "Then don't," Zara repeated her earlier words. "Or if you must, then come back for me. I'll wait." Isaac searched her face as if looking for doubt or uncertainty. Finding none, he nodded slowly. "I'll speak with Simmons. Perhaps there's a way to change the arrangements to stay in Santa Fe longer. And if not, then I'll come back," he promised, "as soon as I can." They returned to the fire, sitting closer now. Zara nestled against Isaac's side with his arm around her shoulders. They spoke softly of possibilities of what Santa Fe might hold for her, of how Isaac might adjust his work to remain near her, of the future that suddenly seemed less uncertain. As the fire burned down to embers, Zara felt a peace settle over her that she had never known before. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for tonight, she was exactly where she was meant to be. They reached Santa Fe the following afternoon, the small herd of cattle moving steadily down the main road toward the stockyards on the edge of town. People paused to watch them pass, women with shopping baskets, children playing in the dusty streets, men lounging outside saloons. Zara felt conspicuous in her trail-worn clothing, aware of curious glances directed her way. Isaac rode beside her, his presence a reassuring constant. "We'll get the cattle settled, then find you proper accommodations," he said, his voice pitched low for her ears alone. "Mrs. Hernandez's boarding house isn't far from the plaza." Zara nodded, taking in the sights and sounds of the city so different from Copper Creek with its mix of cultures, the Spanish influence evident in the architecture and the language she heard spoken around her. It was overwhelming after days on the open trail, yet exciting too. The cattle were delivered to the stockyards without incident, the buyer a portly man named Rodriguez greeting Isaac like an old friend. Business was conducted efficiently, with Isaac translating portions of the conversation for Jim and Pete, who spoke no Spanish. "Señor Rodriguez invites us to dinner at his home this evening," Isaac informed them when the transaction was complete, "to celebrate a successful delivery." Jim and Pete accepted eagerly, clearly familiar with the tradition from previous trips. Isaac turned to Zara, his expression questioning. "Would you like to join us? Rodriguez's wife sets a fine table, and it would be a proper introduction to Santa Fe society." The prospect of cleaning up and enjoying a real meal after days on the trail was tempting, but Zara hesitated. "Would it be appropriate? I'm hardly presentable." Isaac's eyes warmed. "Mrs. Rodriguez will have something you can borrow, I'm sure. She's a kind woman." And so, a few hours later, Zara found herself bathed, dressed in a borrowed gown of deep blue, and seated at the Rodriguez family's expansive dining table. The house was grand by her standards, a spacious adobe structure with a central courtyard, furnished with a mixture of Spanish and American pieces that spoke of wealth and taste. Mrs. Rodriguez, a handsome woman in her 40s with a ready smile and impeccable English, had taken Zara under her wing immediately, providing not only the gown but also a room where she could bathe and rest before dinner. The older woman's kindness reminded Zara poignantly of her own mother, bringing an unexpected lump to her throat. "Isaac tells me you are new to Santa Fe," Mrs. Rodriguez said as they sat down to dinner. "Have you family here?" "No," Zara admitted. "I'm starting fresh." Understanding flickered in the older woman's eyes. "Many come to Santa Fe for new beginnings. It is a good place for such things." The dinner was elaborate by trail standards: roasted meats, beans cooked with chilies, fresh tortillas, and sweet pastries for dessert. Wine flowed freely, and conversation moved easily from business to local gossip to plans for the upcoming fiesta. Zara observed Isaac throughout the meal, noticing how at ease he seemed in this setting, how fluently he shifted between English and Spanish, how respected he clearly was by the Rodriguez family. It was yet another facet of him that she was discovering the social man beneath the reserved exterior. As the evening wound down, Mrs. Rodriguez drew Zara aside. "My husband tells me you need lodging," she said. "Isaac mentioned Mrs. Hernandez's boarding house." "Yes," Zara confirmed. "Isaac thought it would be suitable." Mrs. Rodriguez's expression was thoughtful. "Suitable, yes. But perhaps unnecessary." At Zara's questioning look, she continued, "We have a small guest house in the back garden. My sister usually occupies it when she visits from Mexico City, but she is not expected for several months. It would give you time to find your feet in Santa Fe without the immediate worry of lodging costs." Zara was taken aback by the generous offer. "That's extremely kind, but I couldn't impose." "It is no imposition," Mrs. Rodriguez assured her. "Isaac is like family to us. Any friend of his is welcome here." Her eyes twinkled knowingly. "And perhaps more than a friend, yes." Zara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "We've known each other only a short time." "Sometimes that is all it takes," the older woman said with a smile. "I knew my Eduardo was the one within a week of meeting him. 30 years later, I have not changed my mind." When Isaac joined them a moment later, Mrs. Rodriguez explained her offer. His initial reaction was surprise, followed by evident relief. "That's extraordinarily generous, Maria." "Are you certain?" "Completely certain," she affirmed. "The guest house sits empty most of the year. Better it should shelter someone who needs it." She patted Isaac's arm. "Besides, this way you will know she is safe while you complete your business here." The arrangements were quickly settled. Zara would stay in the Rodriguez family's guest house, a charming one-room structure with its own small courtyard. Isaac, Jim, and Pete would take rooms at their usual boarding house near the stockyards while they concluded their business in the city. As they said their goodbyes for the evening, Isaac drew Zara slightly aside. "Are you comfortable with this arrangement?" he asked quietly. "Mrs. Hernandez's is still an option if you prefer." Zara shook her head. "The Rodriguez family is being incredibly kind, and this way." She hesitated, then added softly, "This way we can see each other more easily while you're in the city." Isaac's eyes darkened with pleasure. "Yes," he agreed. "That is a definite advantage." He hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking about what we discussed last night, about what happens next." "And," Zara prompted when he fell silent, "and I've decided to speak with Rodriguez about staying in Santa Fe longer. He's mentioned before that he could use a man with my skills to help manage his expanding herds." Isaac's expression grew serious. "It wouldn't be permanent, not yet. But it would give us time to be certain of what we both want." Zara's heart quickened at the implication. "I'd like that," she said simply. Isaac's smile was soft in the lamplight. "So would I." He glanced toward the house where their hosts were discreetly keeping their distance. "I should go. It's been a long day and you need rest." "When will I see you tomorrow?" Zara asked. "As soon as I've concluded some business with Rodriguez," Isaac promised. "Mid-morning, perhaps. We could explore the city together if you'd like." "I'd like that very much." He hesitated, clearly wanting to kiss her but aware of their semi-public setting. Instead, he took her hand and raised it to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Good night, Zara." "Good night, Isaac," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. As she watched him walk away, Zara felt a curious mixture of emotions: excitement for the future that suddenly seemed full of possibilities, gratitude for the kindness of strangers, and a deep, growing affection for the man who had changed the course of her life in ways she was only beginning to understand. The guest house was simple but comfortable, with a narrow bed, a small table and chair, a washstand, and a window that overlooked the courtyard. Mrs. Rodriguez had provided fresh linens, a pitcher of water, and even a small vase of flowers, touches that made the space immediately welcoming. As Zara prepared for bed, she found herself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought her here. 2 weeks ago, she had been trapped in a life that offered no escape. Now she was in a vibrant city hundreds of miles from her father's reach, with the promise of a new beginning and the tentative stirrings of a love she had never expected to find. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Zara knew with absolute certainty that she would not trade this moment of possibility for anything in the world. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of new experiences and deepening connections. True to his word, Isaac spent as much time with Zara as his business responsibilities allowed, showing her the city that had become a second home to him over the past few years. They explored the central plaza with its bustling market, visited the ancient mission church with its adobe walls and wooden santos, and wandered through neighborhoods where Spanish, English, and native languages mingled in a vibrant tapestry of sound. Zara absorbed it all eagerly, her natural curiosity and intelligence making her a quick study of the city's complex cultural landscape. Through Mrs. Rodriguez's connections, Zara secured employment at a small dressmaker's shop owned by a French immigrant named Madame Fourier. The work was familiar. Zara had been sewing since childhood, but the clientele and designs were far more sophisticated than anything she had encountered in Copper Creek. Madame Fourier, impressed by Zara's neat stitches and quick learning, soon had her assisting with the more complex gowns for the city's elite. "You have an eye for detail," the Frenchwoman commented after Zara had completed a particularly intricate embroidery pattern, "and a steady hand. Both invaluable in our line of work." The praise warmed Zara, giving her a sense of accomplishment and independence she had never experienced under her father's roof. For the first time in her life, she was earning her own way, making choices based on her own desires rather than someone else's demands. And then there was Isaac. Their relationship deepened with each passing day, built on shared conversations, mutual respect, and a growing physical awareness that made even the briefest touch electric. Isaac was unfailingly considerate, never pushing for more than Zara was ready to give, yet she could feel the intensity of his desire matching her own. They dined together most evenings, either at the Rodriguez home or at small cafes tucked away in the city's winding streets. Sometimes they simply walked together as twilight fell, talking of their pasts, their hopes, the future they were beginning to envision together. "I spoke with Rodriguez," Isaac told her one evening as they sat on a bench in the plaza, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the adobe buildings in shades of gold and rose. "He's offered me a position overseeing his northern properties. It would mean being based here in Santa Fe with occasional travel to check on the outlying ranches." Zara's heart leaped. "You're staying?" Isaac nodded, his eyes serious as they met hers. "If that's what you want." "It is," she said without hesitation. "But what about your obligations to Simmons? The return journey to Copper Creek. Jim and Pete will handle it," Isaac explained. "Rodriguez is sending additional men with them. I've written to Simmons explaining the situation. He'll understand." There was something in his tone, a current of deeper meaning that made Zara ask, "What exactly did you tell him?" Isaac's gaze was steady, unwavering. "The truth, that I've found something in Santa Fe worth staying for." The simple statement, delivered without embellishment or flowery language, touched Zara more deeply than any elaborate declaration could have. It was so essentially Isaac, straightforward, honest, unadorned. "Is that what I am?" she asked softly. "Something worth staying for?" In answer, Isaac reached for her hand, interlacing his fingers with hers. "You're everything worth staying for, Zara Mitchell." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken emotion. Around them, the plaza was growing quieter as shopkeepers closed their doors and families headed home for the evening meal. In the distance, church bells rang, marking the hour. "Isaac," Zara began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, an admission that could not be taken back. For a heartbeat, Isaac was utterly still, his expression unreadable in the fading light. Then his hand tightened on hers, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I think I fell in love with you the moment you stood up to your father, bruised and afraid but still defiant." His free hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch gentle. "I've been fighting it since then, telling myself it was too soon, that you deserved better than a man with my past. But I'm done fighting, Zara. I love you. God help me, but I do." The kiss that followed was unlike any they had shared before, deeper, more certain, a promise and a claiming all at once. Zara leaned into it, her arms winding around Isaac's neck, drawing him closer as the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared above them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said quietly. "Not right away, we can wait until you're ready, but say you'll be my wife, Zara." Joy bloomed in her chest, expanding until she thought it might burst through her skin. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "Yes, I'll marry you, Isaac Westbrook." The weeks that followed were the happiest of Zara's life. With their future decided, she and Isaac set about building a life together in Santa Fe. Isaac took up his new position with Rodriguez's ranching operation, spending his days overseeing cattle and land management, while Zara continued her work at the dressmaker's shop. They decided to marry in the autumn, giving themselves time to establish their footing in the city and to prepare a proper home. With his new salary, Isaac was able to rent a small but comfortable house on the outskirts of town, a place with room for a garden, a stable for their horses, and the promise of children someday. Mrs. Rodriguez took it upon herself to help Zara prepare for the wedding, guiding her through the social customs of Santa Fe and assisting with the selection of fabrics for her wedding dress. The older woman had become a surrogate mother of sorts, filling a void that had been left by Zara's own mother's death. "You will make a beautiful bride," Mrs. Rodriguez declared as they examined a bolt of ivory silk at Madame Fourier's shop. "And Isaac, I have never seen him so happy. It is as if a shadow has lifted from him." Zara knew it was true. The haunted look that had often crossed Isaac's face in their early days together appeared less frequently now. He laughed more easily, spoke more openly of his hopes for their future, allowed himself to plan beyond the next cattle drive or the next job. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch of their future home watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky in shades of crimson and gold, Isaac turned to Zara with an unusually serious expression. "There's something I need to tell you," he began, his voice steady but tense. "Something about my past that you should know before we marry." Zara's heart quickened with apprehension, but she nodded for him to continue. "After Eliza died, after I tracked down the men responsible." He paused, his jaw tightening. "I did things I'm not proud of, Zara. I became someone I didn't recognize, consumed by vengeance, empty of everything but hatred." "You don't have to tell me this," Zara said gently, reaching for his hand. "I do," he insisted. "You deserve to know the man you're marrying, all of him, not just the parts that are easy to love." He took a deep breath. "The last man, I found the leader of the group that attacked Eliza. I didn't just kill him. I made him suffer first, made him understand exactly what he had taken from me." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of past violence and unresolved guilt. Zara studied Isaac's face in the fading light, seeing not the vengeful killer he described, but the man she had come to know, honorable, protective, capable of profound tenderness. "We all have darkness in us, Isaac," she said finally. "What matters is that you found your way back to the light." Isaac's eyes searched hers, looking for judgment or fear and finding neither. "How can you accept it so easily?" "Because I know you," Zara replied simply. "The man who defended a stranger from her father's blows, the man who carried me to safety and asked for nothing in return. The man who has shown me nothing but respect and kindness since the moment we met." She squeezed his hand. "That is who you are, Isaac, not what grief and rage made you do in your darkest hour." The tension in his shoulders eased slightly. "I don't deserve you," he murmured. "Perhaps not," Zara agreed with a small smile. "But you have me nonetheless." Isaac pulled her into his arms then, holding her as if she were something infinitely precious, his face buried in her hair. "I swear to you, Zara Mitchell, that I will spend every day of our life together proving worthy of your faith in me." "I'm counting on it," she whispered back, her heart full to bursting with love for this complicated, honorable man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. They were married on a crisp October morning in the Mission Church, with golden sunlight streaming through the high windows and the scent of pinyon wood smoke in the air. Zara wore a gown of ivory silk with delicate embroidery that she had worked on herself during evenings at the Rodriguez home. Isaac stood tall and handsome in a new suit, his dark hair neatly trimmed, his eyes never leaving her face as she walked toward him down the aisle. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, conducted in both Spanish and English to honor the community that had embraced them. Mrs. Rodriguez wept openly, while her husband beamed with paternal pride. Jim and Pete had returned from their journey to Copper Creek in time to stand with Isaac, both men unusually solemn in their Sunday best. "I, Isaac Westbrook, take you, Zara Mitchell, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Isaac's voice rang clear and certain in the hushed church. "To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." As Zara repeated the vows, her voice trembling slightly with emotion, she marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a violent confrontation on her father's porch to this sacred promise before God and community, it seemed almost miraculous. The kiss that sealed their vows was brief but tender, appropriate for the setting yet conveying the depth of feeling between them. As they turned to face the congregation as husband and wife, Zara felt a sense of rightness, of completion, that she had never known before. The celebration that followed at the Rodriguez hacienda lasted well into the evening, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed half of Santa Fe. As the night drew to a close, Isaac led Zara away from the festivities toward the small house that was now their home, both of them slightly dizzy with happiness, and the unspoken anticipation of their first night as husband and wife. "Mrs. Westbrook," Isaac murmured as they reached the threshold, his eyes dark with promise in the moonlight. "I like the sound of that," Zara admitted, her heart racing as Isaac swept her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. Inside, the house was prepared for their return, a fire laid in the hearth, fresh flowers on the table, the bedroom waiting with clean linens and the soft glow of lamplight. Isaac set Zara gently on her feet, but kept his arms around her, his expression suddenly serious. "I want you to know," he said quietly, "that we can take this as slowly as you need. I know your experience with men has not always been gentle." Zara was touched by his consideration, another reminder of why she had fallen so deeply in love with this man. "I'm not afraid," she assured him, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw. "Not with you, Isaac, never with you." Their first coming together, as husband and wife, was everything Zara could have hoped for, tender and passionate by turns, with Isaac guiding her through unfamiliar territory with infinite patience and care. In his arms, she discovered sensations she had never imagined, a physical communion that matched the emotional bond they had forged over the months of their courtship. Afterward, lying in the circle of Isaac's arms with her head pillowed on his chest, Zara felt a profound sense of peace. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. Isaac's arms tightened around her. "And I love you more than I have words to express." In that moment, the ghosts that had haunted them, both her father's cruelty, Vernon's threatening presence, the tragedy of Isaac's first wife, seemed finally laid to rest. What remained was simply the two of them, bound together by choice and love, facing whatever the future might hold with the strength of their union. 5 years later, Isaac stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching as Zara chased their 3-year-old son, Thomas, through the garden. The boy's laughter rang out in the clear morning air, a sound that never failed to lighten Isaac's heart. Their daughter, Elizabeth, named for Isaac's mother, sat in a basket nearby, barely 6 months old and watching the proceedings with solemn dark eyes that matched her father's. The ranch had prospered under Isaac's management, eventually allowing them to purchase land of their own outside Santa Fe. They had built a comfortable life together, surrounded by friends and the family they had created, far from the shadows of their past. Zara caught Thomas and swung him into her arms, tickling him until he squealed with delight. At 30, she was more beautiful than ever in Isaac's eyes, confident, radiant with happiness, her slender figure now softened by motherhood. As if sensing his gaze, she looked up, her smile widening as their eyes met across the garden. With Thomas balanced on her hip, she made her way to the porch, her steps light despite the weight of the sturdy boy in her arms. "What are you thinking about so seriously, husband?" she asked, leaning in to kiss him softly. Isaac wrapped an arm around her waist, drawing her and Thomas close. "Just how fortunate I am," he replied honestly. "How different my life would have been if I hadn't happened to be riding past your father's house that day." Zara's expression grew thoughtful. "Do you think it was just chance? What else would it be?" She shifted Thomas to her other hip, her free hand coming up to rest against Isaac's cheek. "My mother used to say that some souls are meant to find each other, no matter what obstacles stand in their way." Isaac turned his head to press a kiss to her palm. "Then I'm grateful for whatever force brought us together, chance or fate." Thomas squirmed to be put down, eager to return to his explorations of the garden. As Zara set him on his feet, extracting a promise to stay where she could see him, Isaac pulled her fully into his arms. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Leaving everything behind, coming with me?" Zara's answer was immediate and certain. "Never, not for a single moment." She smiled up at him, her eyes reflecting the depth of feeling between them. "You carried me away from danger, Isaac Westbrook, but you also carried me toward everything I never knew I wanted: a true partnership, a family built on love rather than obligation, a life of our own making." Isaac bent to kiss her, a tender meeting of lips that still held the power to quicken his pulse even after 5 years of marriage. "I think I've been carrying you toward home since the moment we met," he murmured against her mouth, "and I'll keep carrying you for as long as I live." In the garden, Thomas called for his mother to see the butterfly he had found. In her basket, Elizabeth began to fuss, ready for her mid-morning feeding. The ordinary sounds of family life surrounded them, precious in their very normalcy. Zara pressed one more kiss to Isaac's lips before stepping back to attend to their children. "And I'll follow wherever you lead," she promised, her eyes holding his for a moment longer. "Always." As Isaac watched his wife gather their daughter into her arms, their son dancing excitedly around her feet, he felt a fullness in his chest that defied description. From the darkest moment of his life, he had somehow found his way to a love that healed rather than haunted, to a family that brought joy rather than pain, to a future bright with promise rather than shadowed by regret. It was more than he had ever dared to hope for on that fateful day when he had intervened to stop a father's blows and carried a brave, defiant woman away from danger. It was, quite simply, everything.